let's remember that just like WMDs were the pretext for the war in Iraq, the nuclear program is the absolute pretext for this war in Iran. There are no nuclear facilities in Tehran. So if the idea here, the goal here supposedly is to destroy Iran's nuclear program, why do 16 million civilians have to evacuate Tehran, where none of these facilities are located? And again, there's been lots of civilians already killed in Iran, and they're obviously planning on building huge more. Now, speaking of the kind of war propaganda to which we're being subjected, here was Netanyahu today. Every time Israel goes to war against whatever country, every time the U.S. tells its citizens we have to pay for it, we have to arm it, we have to fight with Israel, you'll never guess what country we're told to think of as being equal to the new country that Israel wants to attack.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. In recent months, Iran has taken steps that it has never taken before, steps to weaponize this enriched uranium. And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival. 80 years ago, the Jewish people were the victims of a Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazi regime. Today, the Jewish state refuses to be a victim of a nuclear Holocaust perpetrated by the Iranian regime.
The new Nazis. We were told Hamas is the new Nazis, worse than ISIS. We were told that about Saddam Hussein. He was repeatedly equated with Adolf Hitler. That's a crucial part of the underpinning of war propaganda for both the United States and Israel, to invoke this World War II example that now happened 75 years ago, and that has been used and hauled out to justify every war. Now, we've shown you before all the footage. Everyone has seen now the montage of Netanyahu over 30 years, of Israel over 40 years, going back to the 1980s, ever since the Iranian people overthrew the Shah of Iran, the puppet installed by the CIA to serve Israel and the United States and use Iranian resources in servitude to be able to stay in power, repress the Iranian people. Ever since that revolution occurred in 1979 that drove out the Shah and swept in a government, an Islamic government, vowing to protect Iranian sovereignty at all costs, Iranian nationalism, Iranian sovereignty. Ever since then, we've been told for decades that they're about to get nuclear weapons. They're on the verge of getting nuclear weapons. They're weeks away, they're months away, maybe a year, milliseconds. And it never came true. And yet the amount of people who are now willing to just start nodding the minute Netanyahu says, oh, they were about to get nuclear weapons this time, it's so alarming how easy it is to just convince people to nod and cheer as some other country just gets blown to bits, as our U.S. resources are diverted to the military-industrial complex, to weapons manufacturers, starving again the people at home in the United States, the American working class, the American middle class, all of whom were promised and constantly are promised that this time it'll be different, that we're going to stay out of foreign wars. You just give somebody a pretext and they're so eager to believe that their country is fighting for the right reasons. I think a lot of it too is that when people feel impotent in their lives, they start getting vicarious strength. They like watching bombs going off and people being killed and feeling like, yeah, we're the more powerful ones. We're crushing them. We're destroying them, which is why the world stood by. Most of it did, certainly in the West, as all of Gaza has basically been destroyed and huge numbers of people killed. But what makes the Netanyahu claim that Iran was about to get a nuclear weapon this time so extraordinary, when we watch members of the political class in both parties repeating it, Donald Trump repeating it, is that less than 3 months ago, Donald Trump's handpicked director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, whose job it is to assess the intelligence and speak with one voice on behalf of the intelligence community about their best assessment about what the intelligence shows, went to the US Senate and was asked about whether there's intelligence showing that, as Israel claims, Iran is actively pursuing nuclear weapons. Just listen to what she said. How is this being so easily disregarded? This is not some deep state functionary. This is not a career service person. This is not a holdover. This is Donald Trump's choice, who he fought very hard to install as DNI because he trusted her to give him the real intelligence. And this is what she said under penalty of perjury, under lying to the Senate is a crime, when asked whether Iran is actively pursuing nuclear weapons.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program.
So that was the assessment of the intelligence community just 3 months ago, which has been repeatedly affirmed by the intelligence community that Iran is not, in fact, pursuing nuclear weapons. And I think what has happened in American discourse and in Trump's brain as well is that the distinction between a nuclear energy program, which the entire world has always agreed Iran has the right to have, and a nuclear weapons program, I think that distinction has been deliberately obscured. You may remember at the start of the negotiation process between the US and Iran, which President Trump was very enthusiastic about, Steve Witkoff said, of course, the deal has to allow the Iranians to enrich at a low enough level to have nuclear energy. What we can't have them do is enrich at 60% or 90%, where they can get close to a nuclear weapon. That is what the Iran deal did. It put all huge inspectors and surveillance inside of Iran, inside of these facilities underground. We were able to monitor that Iran was not enriching uranium anywhere over the limit to which they agreed to keep it for nuclear energy purposes. And when President Trump withdrew from that deal, despite, you can read every congressional report saying that Iran had been abiding by that deal, the US government, Western governments, and NATO monitoring services, once President Trump withdrew from that deal, the inspectors were no longer permitted to be in there, but we still have all kinds of intelligence, including all kinds of spies and everything else, as we've seen over the last 5 days, tons of spies working for the US and Israel. That's how the intelligence community knew, and eavesdropping and surveillance, that the Ayatollah had not authorized or directed Iran to seek a nuclear weapon, despite what Prime Minister Netanyahu was claiming to justify this war. Now, I want you to listen to this. This is in 2002, September of 2002, so just a little bit under 6 months before the U.S. went and invaded Iraq, which overwhelmingly people in the United States agree was a huge disaster, a massive mistake, or really destroyed faith and trust in what our U.S. government tells us, because it turned out that everything they said about why that war was necessary turned out to be a lie. We were told it would be quick and easy. It lasted many, many years. Thousands of Americans died in that war for reasons no one understands. And I'm not really sure why, but when the U.S. Congress was debating whether to authorize the United States to go invade Iraq, one of the people they wanted to come and testify before the Congress to tell them what to think and how to understand things, they invited Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And he went to the U.S. Congress, gave a ton of interviews publicly as well, urging and encouraging the United States to go and invade Iraq, promising that it would bring all kinds of peace and harmony and democracy throughout the Middle East, would transform it. The United States had a unique chance to get rid of Saddam Hussein and transform the Middle East forever for the good. But he also insisted that Iran had a WMD program and was pursuing nuclear weapons. Exactly what he's trying to convince Americans now about Iran. Listen to what he said. Just listen to how identical this is. This is Netanyahu, 23 years ago, convincing the United States to go fight a different war in the Middle East against one of Israel's most steadfast enemies.
And this is a tyrant who is feverishly trying to acquire nuclear weapons. And today the United States must destroy the same regime, because a nuclear-armed Saddam will place the security of our entire world at risk. It is simply not
I just want you to listen to the kind of dictatorial language he uses there. Because, as we said, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, until Netanyahu fired him just 6 months ago or so, went on CNN earlier today and said the United States is obligated, Trump is obligated to go fight this war against Iran with us. Like giving out orders, like obligated by what? By Israel's dictates? Listen to Netanyahu using that same language.
will place the security of our entire world at risk is simply not reflecting the reality to assume that Saddam isn't feverishly working to develop nuclear weapons. As we speak. If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
I guarantee you, he said, I guarantee you. There's no way to deny, he said, that Saddam Hussein is rushing feverishly to get those nuclear weapons. We have to stop that. But also, he said, I guarantee you to Americans and to the U.S. Congress that if you go in and take out Saddam Hussein, you're going to spread peace and stability and democracy to this region.
Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. Principles of real estate, the 3 L's, location, location, location. The 3 principles of winning the war on terror are the 3 W's, winning, winning, and winning. The more victories you amass, the easier the next victory becomes. The first victory in Afghanistan makes the second victory in Iraq that much easier. The second victory in Iraq will make the third victory that much easier, less than dismantling.
By the way, you know what the third victory was supposed to be? So we were going to have the first victory in Afghanistan. That, of course, we never got. It took 20 years. We left after 20 years. Blew up a bunch of civilians on the way out. They then killed a bunch of our service members on the way out. And within seconds or days, the Taliban marched right back into power as if nothing had happened. After we were told for years that the U.S. military spent billions and billions and billions of dollars building up the Afghan security forces, that one day we're going to rule Afghanistan in our favor once we left. We left after 20 years. In a deal negotiated by President Trump, implemented by President Biden, and the Taliban marched right into power. So there was no first victory there. There was no second victory in Iraq that Netanyahu promised. Even Tony Blair, who, when he realized there were no weapons of mass destruction, despite having been one of the most vocal and ardent supporters of joining George Bush, having the UK join George Bush in that war, and did so. When he realized there were no WMDs, as he kept insisting there were, he said he resorted to, well, at the very least, the worst that will be said is that we removed a vicious dictatorship and freed the Iraqi people from this vicious dictator. So it still will be a noble war. And by 2012, Tony Blair was admitting that what gave rise to ISIS and all of its splinter groups that we were told was so much worse than Al-Qaeda, which we had spent a decade fighting, was the power vacuum that we left in Iraq by taking out the government, balkanizing the country, letting huge amounts of civil war take place, war against the United States, insurgency battles against the countries that went to war. So there was no second victory in Iraq as well. And if anything, the Iraq war redounded most to the benefit of Iran. Saddam Hussein and Iran hated each other. They went to war against each other. And by removing the Ba'athist Party, it empowered Shiite militias who have more power in Iraq now than ever before, and therefore emboldened and empowered Iran in the region. That was the result of the Iraq war that Benjamin Netanyahu promised would transform the region. And of course, the nuclear weapons that he swore Saddam Hussein was pursuing and the chemical and biological weapons he assured us they had were all non-existent. But you see, he said, we're going to do that first victory in Afghanistan, the second victory in Iraq, and then we can do the third victory all the more easily. So what was that? What was that third victory? War in Afghanistan, war in Iraq, what was it? You can go back starting around 2004, 2005, neocons started going on a propaganda campaign saying the next step after Baghdad is Tehran. That was their intention. They wanted to have regime change in Afghanistan, regime change in Iraq, and then go to Tehran. That was the big prize. And because the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq failed, they never got to go do that. But he wanted American troops. Thousands of American troops died in these wars he was urging. And he wanted a lot more to go die in Iran. So that was the third victory he was promising. It just took 23 years to get the U.S. to greenlight and then start supporting and funding the war that Israel has craved the United States fighting with them for decades.
His regime will do. Because Saddam's nuclear program has fundamentally changed in those 2 decades. He no longer needs one large reactor to produce the deadly material necessary for atomic bombs. He can produce it in centrifuges the size of washing machines that can be hidden throughout the country. And I want to remind you that Iraq is a very big country. It is not the size of Monte Carlo. It is a big country. And I believe that even free and unfettered inspections will not uncover these portable manufacturing sites of mass death.
I mean, just think about it as a rational person. This foreign leader, for some reason, is invited to tell the United States what it should do and whether or not to launch a major ground invasion on the other side of the world. Everything he says, things that he guarantees, things he promises, things he insists on, all of it turned out to be lies. That same foreign leader returns 2 decades later, reads exactly the same script, only this time about Iran, and people just start nodding their head without any kind of skepticism or doubt about the truth of what he's saying to lure the United States into another war. Oh yeah, sure, this time he's telling the truth. Listen to this speech from George W. Bush. This was kind of when the Bush administration had decided it was going to war in Iraq. There was no turning back. And then it was this question of selling the war robustly enough to get 70% of the people to get on board with it, which ultimately happened. And this was one of Bush's primary initial speeches, where he basically laid out the case for why we had to go to war with Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein. And I just want you to note in every second of this speech how identical, not similar, identical it is to what we're hearing now. This is a speech he gave in Cincinnati in September of 2002, so right around the time that Netanyahu was in the United States, assuring everybody about how great the Iraq war would be and the necessity for it. Listen to what he said.
Information from a high-ranking Iraqi nuclear engineer who had defected revealed that despite his public promises, Saddam Hussein had ordered his nuclear program to continue. The evidence indicates that Iraq is reconstituting its nuclear weapons program. Saddam Hussein has held numerous meetings with Iraqi nuclear scientists, a group he calls his nuclear mujahideen, his nuclear holy warriors. Satellite photographs reveal that Iraq is rebuilding facilities at sites that have been part of its nuclear program in the past. Iraq has attempted to purchase high-strength aluminum tubes and other equipment needed for gas centrifuges, which are used to enrich uranium for nuclear weapons. If the Iraqi regime is able to produce, buy, or steal an amount of highly enriched uranium a little larger than a single softball, it could have a nuclear weapon in less than a year. And if we allow that to happen, a terrible line would be crossed. Saddam Hussein would be in a position to blackmail anyone who opposes his aggression. He would be in a position to dominate the Middle East. He would be in a position to threaten America. And Saddam Hussein would be in a position to pass nuclear technology to terrorists. Some citizens wonder, after 11 years of living with this problem, why do we need to confront it now? And there's a reason. We've experienced the horror of September the 11th. We have seen that those who hate America are willing to crash airplanes into buildings full of innocent people. Our enemies would be no less willing. In fact, they would be eager to use biological or chemical or a nuclear weapon. Knowing these realities, America must not ignore the threat gathering against us. Facing clear evidence of peril, We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
So we can't provide you proof or evidence that this is happening, but do you want to wait and have the proof be the mushroom cloud that Saddam Hussein drops on the United States or gives to his terrorist friends to drop on the United States? Now, as we know, every word of that was absolute bullshit. Every word of that was false. Every word of it was disproven within a short period of time. I don't mean most of it or some of it. I mean all of it. At least then, Americans had the excuse that this was barely a year after 9/11, like a truly traumatic attack on the United States. People were still quite emotional about it. If you told them that Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda somehow had an alliance with Iraq, which of course Jeffrey Goldberg and others convinced Americans they did falsely, that Iraq would get these nuclear weapons that they're about to have and give it to Osama bin Laden, who would then use it like a similar 9/11 attack, but this time with nuclear weapons. At least there was like an emotional manipulation there that was still an open wound. What's the excuse now for believing this? Look at all the countries with nuclear weapons. Iran and Iraq, Pakistan and India just fought a war. Two countries that hate each other for decades. And it ended fairly quickly with minimal damage. It was a real war. It was quite aggressive, but it ended quickly. And one of the reasons is because both sides know the other has nuclear weapons. It serves as a deterrent. Saddam Hussein is going to take nuclear weapons and drop one on the United States, despite the fact that we have the largest nuclear stockpile in the world after Russia, the most powerful, and obliterate Iraq. North Korea, which we're told is the most twisted, most demented, most bizarre, most psychologically unhinged country, has nuclear weapons. They've had them for a long time. Where are their suicidal impulses driving them to use nuclear weapons? The Iranians have demonstrated incredible restraint as they've been attacked in so many ways by Israel, threatened by the United States and Israel over many years. But we watch the government lie to us using this exact script. What is the excuse for believing it now? Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.